For one night in 1999, World Wrestling Entertainment unveiled a match that sounded outrageous even by Attitude Era standards. It was called the Kennel From Hell. On paper, it looked like a piece of hardcore madness designed to become an instant cult spectacle. In reality, it became something very different. Instead of going down as a brutal classic, it went down as one of the most infamous disasters in company history. The concept itself was pure excess. Al Snow and Big Boss Man fought for the Hardcore Championship inside a steel cage, and that cage was surrounded by the Hell in a Cell structure. Between the inner cage and the outer cell were guard dogs, meant to make the whole thing feel even more chaotic and dangerous. To win, a wrestler had to escape both structures. It was a one-time only creation, and even the company's own later retrospective treated it as a uniquely impractical oddity. That is what makes the Kennel From Hell so fascinating. On the surface, it had all the ingredients of a late 1990s hardcore attraction. It had a heated feud, a title on the line, two recognizable performers, multiple cages, and the promise of animals circling the ring like the match had crossed into some kind of live-action fever dream. In theory, it had the kind of bizarre visual identity that World Wrestling Entertainment has often turned into memorable television. But theory and execution are two very different things. The problem was that the match's most heavily advertised feature did not behave the way the company needed it to. Instead of coming across as menacing, the dogs largely distracted from the action. In the company's own later account, the bout became one of the most infamous debacles in its history, with dogs that would rather play than prowl and a crowd that struggled to follow what was happening. That is a devastating summary, and it gets right to the heart of why the match failed. The gimmick did not heighten the fight, it overwhelmed it. And that is the real difference between a weird match that works and a weird match that collapses. A successful gimmick match gives the feud a stronger setting. It sharpens the conflict. It makes the violence feel more urgent or the atmosphere feel more dramatic. The Kennel From Hell did the opposite. The idea was so strange and the visual chaos so awkward that the audience's attention drifted away from the wrestlers and toward the malfunctioning spectacle around them. Once that happens, the match is in trouble. The gimmick stops being a tool and becomes the problem. The company's own descriptions of the match years later are revealing. It has called the bout a unique steel cage experience, a bizarre one-time only creation, and one of the more notorious matches in history. None of that sounds like the language of a lost classic waiting to be rediscovered. It sounds like a concept the company itself understands as an infamous misfire. That is why the Kennel From Hell was never repeated, not because it was forgotten, but because it was remembered too clearly for the wrong reasons. It was not a match that merely underperformed. It became a cautionary tale about over-designing a stipulation until the mechanics start to work against the performers. The company has always experimented with strange concepts, but most of the successful ones have a clean hook, a ladder, a cage, a casket. The Kennel From Hell had too many moving parts and not enough control. There is also a bigger lesson in its failure. A match can be bizarre, violent, and visually memorable, but it still has to let the wrestlers be the center of the story. If the audience leaves talking more about the setup than the actual performance, the stipulation has probably swallowed the match whole. That is exactly what happened here. Al Snow and Big Boss Man were trapped inside a concept that was too unwieldy to support them. And in the end, that is why the Kennel From Hell still has such a powerful reputation. It is not remembered as one of World Wrestling Entertainment's darkest gimmicks because it was the most violent or the most dangerous. It is remembered because it was such a spectacular miscalculation. The company took a feud, wrapped it in cages, added dogs, and created a match so awkward in execution that it instantly became infamous. Some gimmick matches fade away quietly. The Kennel From Hell did not. It crashed into company history and stayed there. That is the real story of the Kennel From Hell. It was the disaster World Wrestling Entertainment never repeated because it exposed the limit of spectacle without control. The idea was loud. The presentation was absurd. The memory was permanent. But once the bell rang, the company had created not a classic, but a warning.